So they put the AED on him, and as soon as it said, no shock advised, there's a ton of people here, but me and my buddy who are trained know at that point, that's when it was truly over. And the gravity of the situation starts to sink in. And then the time came where we had to call his daughter, and we had to tell him. That his dad wasn't coming home. And that's tough. That's a super tough thing to do. And we got to experience it that day. What's going on, everybody? I figured I would start out my YouTube week with a little story time. And today's story is about my 10-year career in the most dangerous job in the world. Now, where that statistic comes from of it being the most dangerous job in the world is in deaths per 100,000, because there are not many tower climbers in the United States. I think there's about 20,000, but there are a lot of deaths among that 20,000. So it makes that statistic super high, and it ranks number one pretty consistently in that regard. And there is a lot of death in the industry. I have almost died countless times doing the job, and I've experienced a death on my site, and that's a really crazy story, but I'll tell that a little bit later. If you're wondering what my YouTube week is, it's Tuesday through Saturday, where I try to upload every single day, so that is 5 videos a week. So if that's something that interests you, consider subscribing to the channel. With that being said, let's get straight into this story. Now, where I grew up in New York, there was a country club nearby where I started out as a dishwasher and fought my way up to a chef's position. And I was there for a couple of years. It was a very small family environment, and I absolutely loved it. So I wanted to pursue a career in cooking. I went ahead and applied to Colorado Mountain College's program out there in Breckenridge, and they have an apprenticeship, which you would go to before you go to school at the local resorts, and I was at Keystone Resort. So I moved myself all the way on out to Colorado. They had employee housing for like $400 a month. It was sweet. The pay was like $10.25, so not very good, but I was happy nonetheless to be in that location. So I went ahead out to my job for my first day at the Outback Lodge in the back of Keystone. This first day also happened to be Black Friday, so we were incredibly busy. We actually served 13,000 people that day. There were about 30 to 40 chefs in the kitchen. The head chef was a really old, kind of mean, stubborn guy, and this was absolutely the opposite of what I was used to. In the country club, we were cooking very quality meals for people with very quality ingredients. And up at the lodge, we were cooking soups in bags and selling them for $30 each. Frozen chicken tenders, frozen burgers. It was just completely soulless. That kitchen was soulless because there was so many chefs there, and they cycled in and out all the time, and you're just not, the food has no soul in it. It was like working in a fast food restaurant, basically, except for we were totally hanging the customers out to dry with the prices. I realized that really wasn't going to be for me. That job was completely soul-sucking, so I went ahead and left. With that, I no longer had employee housing, so I found an ad on Craigslist of a guy who was renting out his couch for a couple of $100 a month, and I went with that. Now, without a job, bills are piling up, and I tried to work at Jimmy John's for a little bit, did that for a couple of months, but I knew that I needed to get something bigger going for myself. And one day I was on my computer just browsing Craigslist of all places for jobs, just to see what was going on in the area, because Craigslist was a lot bigger back then. This is about 2014. And I found this ad on Craigslist, and it was all caps, and it said, "Do you want to be a tower climber?" And it was for $14 an hour, which is a lot of money to me at that time. I went ahead and applied to the ad as a joke. And to my surprise, I actually got a call back. So I went ahead and trucked it on to Denver at a local Starbucks. And I met this guy that I didn't know, just one person there. He met me kind of like we were just meeting up to go hang out. It was very unprofessional, and we just had a conversation about the job. And that interview went super well. It was kind of like two old friends catching up over coffee. It was super smooth, and it went really well, so I got the job. Luckily for me, this guy in Denver had this office building that had 2 floors. So the office was on the first floor, and above was an actual apartment with a kitchen. And there were only 4 employees at the time, so all 4 of us were able to stay in that apartment. And he didn't charge us anything for it. So we had free housing in the city of Denver, which is insane if you know Denver prices. So this was a pretty sweet deal. $14 an hour, free housing. I was 18. I was living large. A lot of the first couple of jobs we did were in Nebraska and Iowa, in the middle of absolute nowhere. Super windy, super cold, really miserable, because this guy's first client was in Nebraska and they were kind of dishing out work in that area. But he just took on this new, much bigger client in Denver. So that's why he had moved his office. So we were kind of in this weird in-between time where I had to go 7 hours to Nebraska, and we did rotation work. So this is very light for the industry. A lot of people do 6 or 8 weeks on and then 1 week off, but we were doing 3 weeks on, 1 week off. So I still lived on the couch in the mountains, and I would drive to Nebraska and stay in hotels for 3 weeks and climb towers and do all of that stuff. And then I would come back and have a whole week off. It was a pretty nice schedule for me, being so young, not having a girlfriend, not having family to worry about. It worked out really well for me. Now, I remember climbing my first tower, and it was in Iowa, and it was a modest 300 feet, which is modest for that area. They get up to 500 or so for cellular work, and FM broadcast towers and AM towers can get up to 1,000, 2,000 feet. And I just remember climbing up, and the wind was just whipping at like 40 miles an hour. So it was pretty nerve-wracking. And just that the act of climbing like this, because it had staggered pegs, kind of like a ladder, it just completely, your forearms just basically caught on fire after, maybe 50 feet. So it took me a very long time to get used to that, but I got in really good shape from doing this. And one of the highlights of those Nebraska times that we had was climbing a 750-foot tower to replace the light bulbs on it, all of the beacons. And these bulbs are like this big. They look basically like a regular light bulb. They're just massive. And you put them in a little pouch on your harness, and sometimes they break. So imagine being, 600 feet up, which takes at least an hour, maybe 2 to climb, and your light bulb just shatters. So we would take extras. There would be multiple people, and that was a ton of fun, except for the bolts that bolt down the protecting case for these beacons are exposed to the elements at all times, so they are seized on there. But other than that, it was super fun, and one of the highlights of climbing towers is the views that you get. So we didn't really get to take advantage of it at that time because Nebraska and Iowa is corn and fields and ranches. After a couple of months in Nebraska, we finally started working in Denver, and that was when I moved into that office that guy had. So I moved away from my roommate's couch basically into that office for free housing. And we were working mostly on cellular equipment. So AT&T was our main customer. And with cell sites, especially in cities, a lot of them are on rooftops. And that can come with benefits and drawbacks for sure. You don't have to climb anything. Basically, you can just walk up to the roof and the antennas and everything are right there. Whereas on a tower, you have to hang off and you have a positioning lanyard and you have basically a little swing on your harness. So you position yourself and you can sit on the swing. But if you're working up like this on something, you don't have like a backrest or anything. So your abs just get like rock hard over, just a couple of weeks of doing this. It's the most incredible ab workout ever, but it's really physically taxing. So it was nice to have this little patch of rooftops that we had. And we were working away. Some of them are towers in Denver, but mostly in cities, they are on rooftops, so it's a little bit different. And then I got in trouble with the law, unfortunately, and I had to take a little break. So what I did was I applied to the EMT program in Leadville at Colorado Mountain College. I went there for 2 semesters to do that, and I had to do community service and a bunch of other stuff from the trouble that I got in, so I was in one place. Doing that job where I'm traveling for 3 weeks at a time and then coming back for a week does not fly when you get in trouble with the law. You really need to be in one place. So that's what I did. I just went back to school. And I was thinking about pursuing medicine at the time, but when I got out of that first year at the community college there, my old boss from the tower climbing company approached me with a pretty attractive offer, which was $19 an hour, which is a ton of money for me at that time. I mean, I was making $14 before, and then I was paying to go to school, and then I got a $19 an hour offer. So I accepted that, and I got sucked right back into the industry. I got myself on back to Denver, and I was still able to stay in that little office apartment for free, and I kept on working. A lot of rooftops, some towers, not too many though, so it was pretty boring. The only drawback about working on rooftops is it can be super hot. And in Denver, it's dry and hot, and the sun beats down on you super bad. And a lot of commercial rooftops are white, so it's kind of like the sunlight reflecting off of snow all the time. It's very inconvenient. And then one time I left a crescent wrench out in the sun on the rooftop for 20 minutes because I had to go to a different spot and do something else. And I came back and I grabbed my crescent wrench and I actually got 2nd-degree burns on my hand, which is just insane. So the heat can really get to you at points, especially on rooftops. At least when you're on a tower, you're exposed 360 degrees to the elements, and usually there's a good bit of wind. So even on a hot day, it can be pretty cool. However, it doesn't fare so well for the winter time. And I have climbed towers in the middle of blizzards, in negative-degree weather, and it's just awful because that same thing that works to your benefit in the summer, being exposed 360 degrees, works totally against you in the winter. And nothing was more attractive at that time than working a full day, freezing your butt off, and getting to go back to the hotel and get in the hot tub. That was just one of the most rewarding experiences ever. One thing about this little patch of work that I did was the hours weren't too bad. We only worked up to about 60 hours, and that would be on a busy week. We normally worked more like 50, which I know is a lot, but it's not a lot for that industry. So working for that company was really nice, and I worked there for about a year and a half after this school thing that I did, and I decided to apply to another job because when I first started working for that company. There was only 4 people there, and we were basically like a family, and we would, go out to get beers or dinner. And that family dynamic that I love so much about the country club was there. However, kind of late into the Denver project that we were doing, he started hiring a lot more employees. The benefits that he awarded to us, like the housing and some other stuff, he had to start taking that away because he was growing as a company. And he really kind of went through this change where it didn't feel like a family environment anymore. It felt like he was really working against us, and he was really strict and low on pay. We did figure out that even though $19 is a lot, it's not a lot for that industry. And he wouldn't budge on our pay, but at the same time, he would do things like buy a super expensive condo in the mountains, and he bought a couple of planes even. He bought like a Cessna plane and a different one, and he would do all of this stuff right in front of us while being super cheap. So he kind of went through a change, and that was really sad to go through that because it was so awesome at the beginning. I absolutely loved working there, and then I just hated it. So I went back on Craigslist and tried to find another tower company in Denver to apply to, and I found one, went to that interview, and that was the same thing. It was a panel interview because I was applying to a higher position where I was just a technician before. I was applying to a top hand position, which is kind of like the foreman's, first guy to go to. He's kind of like the second lead on site. And in that interview, they asked me how much I was making, and I lied to them. I said $22 an hour, which I would always recommend you do when you're applying to a job. It's not that bad. It's kind of your one time to get a wage, because people aren't really good at giving raises nowadays. So kind of what you get when you get the job is going to kind of be your anchor pay. So I went ahead and lied, and they offered me $24 an hour, which was a $5 raise from what I was making. So I was sold, and I went ahead to work for this new company. The first job site that I went up to work for these guys was a big guide tower, which is the very tall, thin towers with the wires running down. And it was in the middle of nowhere, Colorado, which is common for a lot of these sites. People don't like towers in their neighborhoods. But I rolled up to this tower, and this one foreman who I just met, he was super cool, but he was working with a bunch of brand new guys, and he wasn't able to climb up there and get eyes on the actual work himself. So he had me do that, and that's pretty typical for a top hand to do. That's kind of why it's called top hand. They're, your main guy on the top side on the tower to make sure everything is going well. So I climbed up there, and the site was just an absolute disaster. There are standards that AT&T gives out. They're very laid out, and they're very strict with them too. Back then, they used to actually send a construction manager from AT&T out to look at the site, and they would also request pictures of absolutely everything on the tower, and they were very strict. And this site was a total disaster. There were dozens and dozens and dozens of things wrong, and coming from a smaller company where I was at, where we all knew each other and we did really good work, to this much bigger company, and seeing this site in this condition, I was like appalled. So at the end of that day, I called the construction manager, who is the guy that hired me for my company, and I basically told him what was going on. And I never had this intention, but it kind of rubbed off onto him this way, that he thought I was just going to leave immediately because of how bad it was. So only 2 weeks into this new job, they went ahead and made me a foreman and gave me my own crew, because they thought that I was going to leave. So that was great, except for it did not come with a pay raise. I was still at 24, and now I had to lead a crew. Now, being a foreman can be really stressful because you work at the tower, which is what all the guys do, but then you have to go home and assemble those packages, those closeout packages, which are all of the photos that get sent to AT&T. There's a lot of information that you have to give about the antennas, and there's more programming work that you have to do on site. There's just so much more work as a foreman than just a regular technician. And you're in charge of all these people. You're responsible for them. If they get hurt, it's kind of on you. And that's a really big responsibility, especially for a 20, I think I was about 20 at that time. Early on in that part of my career, we were in downtown Denver, and it actually was a tower, which is very unusual for a downtown area, but it was a tower, and it was in one of the sketchiest areas ever, and there were tons of homeless people there, and they would do, what people who are homeless do, and, go to the bathroom everywhere, basically, and it was in the middle of the summer. And because this was in such a dangerous area, the compound at the bottom of the tower was surrounded by this 15-foot brick wall, and sometimes, homeless people would throw needles over that wall. So it was super dangerous. There were a lot of sketchy people there. And the sun, because it was summer, would come down and bake all of the waste that was on the ground. So it had a very certain smell to it, which was just awful. But the sketchiest thing about that was we had a man lift, which are super sketchy. Most of the times that I came close to death while I was on the tower was in a man lift. A tower is anchored into the ground in solid concrete and a crazy foundation, and they sway a little bit, but they are anchored. You're not worrying about that tipping over. But a man lift is super sketchy, and it always feels like it's going to tip over. And especially because some of these towers were taller, we had to use some of the really tall man lifts, like the 180 footers. And if you were up at 180 feet in one of those man lifts and you just click the joystick left like a tiny little bit to boom left, you will swing 15 feet to either side because it's so delicate, because that boom arm is 180 feet long. So any tiny little input is just magnified up at the top. And in the wind, they sway a ton and just always feel like they're going to tip over. They are super sketchy. So we were using one of these man lifts at this site, and we had issues at the site. There was an outage. So we had to go there in the middle of the night. It was 3 a.m, and we were in this super sketchy area, just me and one other guy, my top hand at the time. And I was up in the lift by myself, and he was down low making sure nobody walked up and messed with the lift, because it was a really sketchy time in a really sketchy area. And yeah, we even considered calling local law enforcement just to kind of hang around in the area. We never ended up doing that, but it was very sketchy already. And on top of that, I'm in this super sketchy man lift that I really don't like. Now, I am checking out the issue at the top, and how this tower was designed is it had equipment at the top and then it had equipment kind of in the middle. So I'm with my man lift kind of in between those two pieces of equipment. And since it's 3 a.m, I had already worked all day and only got a couple hours at home. I am dead tired. I'm freaked out about the man lift and the environment and literally everything else. And I start bringing the lift down. And I didn't realize that equipment was right below me. So the basket started to sit on top of the equipment, and it started to bend that equipment down. And the man lift was making super weird noises at the time, and I still don't know what's going on. And all of a sudden, my top hand is screaming at the top of his lungs, and I still have no idea what's going on. And all of that force kind of gives way at once, and my basket on top of this equipment, they kind of split, and the basket just goes whoa, whoa, like up and down like 20 feet. And I almost got knocked out of the basket because of that. And that can happen in man lifts too. Like if you're driving them and you drive on a bump, you're all the way up here. And again, it's magnified. So you can get bounced out of the lift. And that almost happened to me. So it's, again, like middle of the night, super sketchy area. And this stuff just happened. And when people scream in that certain way, you know something is terribly wrong. So I am just filled with adrenaline at this point from almost dying, and not in the way that I would have thought of. I would have thought somebody would come up to us and attack us. So it was completely unexpected. And I just sat there in the middle of the air in this lift for like 15 minutes while I collected myself. And that was really just the start of the near-death experiences at that company. However, it's pretty funny because most of the near-death experiences did not happen at the tower or even the construction site. They happened on the road because you are traveling so much for this job. You're traveling everywhere. You can travel all over the country for it, and you get exposed to all sorts of drivers. And I've had some really terrible instances. Like there was one, I was on a very open road in the middle of Colorado, and it's just a 2-lane road, and there's a dotted line so you can pass if you need to. But I am in a Ram 2500 with a trailer on the back, a big flatbed trailer. So I'm pretty heavy, but the speed limit was like 60 or 65, and the guy in front of me is going like 40. So I'm like, even though I'm really heavy and I'm really long, I really need to get past this guy, man. Like I have 2 hours to get back home. I want to get back home, and this guy's going super slow. So I get into the oncoming lane to pass because it's very open. You can see for a very long time. There were no cars, so I felt pretty safe about it. And I start passing this guy, and this guy speeds up when I get next to him. So he speeds up, and I'm stepping on it to try to continue to pass this guy. And I have to pass this guy more than a regular car would because I have this like 26-foot flatbed in the back. So I have a lot of work to do. And this guy is just matching my speed now. Like I was probably going at least 65 when I started passing because he's going like 40, and he sped all the way up to 65. So we're speeding up and speeding up and speeding up together, and I'm in the oncoming lane. So finally, we kind of start to get up a hill. It's so much so, this super open road, we've gone through the entire passing zone of this road. And this car, of course, pops up in the oncoming lane while we're next to each other. So basically, I'm heading straight towards another car at probably 75 miles an hour at this point, and that person's probably doing a similar speed, and we're going right towards each other. So I had to slam on the brakes to let the guy next to me keep going to get over to avoid dying in the middle of absolute nowhere, Colorado, where there's no services for 40 miles. Like, if you get hurt out there, you're pretty much done. So that was one of the times. And another time, something very similar happened in another deserted area of Colorado where I was not hauling a trailer or anything. I just had the truck, and it was a U-Haul truck. So someone's renting this huge-ass truck, and they were going super slow. I went into the oncoming lane to pass them, and they sped up. But because I didn't have a trailer, I was able to finally get ahead of him. But even though it was wide open and I was able to pass this person, by the time I actually did, because the guy sped up, there was another car coming in the oncoming lane, and we almost collided head on. We were probably by the time I pass this U-Haul truck, because they're not super fast, but they can accelerate a little bit. But like I said, I have a 2500 empty truck, so it's pretty good at accelerating. But by the time I get ahead of this guy, I get just ahead of this guy, and I have to whip over to the other lane because we're now coming up to a turn, and there's a guy coming through this turn in the oncoming lane. Moral of that story really is that people can be absolute idiots on the road, and you have to be super careful. Like, I think it's hilarious that in working the most dangerous job in the world for 10 years, most of the times that I almost died was because of people on the road, not at the job site or anything like that. Aside from the road incidents, this new position at this new job was going really well. We were knocking out sites and everything. However, we were working a lot more than I was at my last company, which is good because I was making a ton of money with overtime, especially at 24 an hour overtime. But it's super exhausting. Like, this is an extremely taxing job. You're climbing, you're using literally every muscle in your body, and you could be doing it for 12 hours a day. And then the next day, you do the exact same thing. And if something goes wrong, if you are doing maintenance to a cell site, say AT&T site, and you take off service to change out an antenna or something, they make you write to them for an approval, and they will only give you from, say, 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. Or sometimes they'll even make you do it overnight, but it's a window. And AT&T at least reserves the right to charge contractors $35,000 per hour that a site is down outside of an approved window. So it's very important. And if anything goes wrong while you're performing this maintenance, you have to stay on site until it goes back up. I mean, this led to one time a 40-hour grind because of this. What had happened there was we were doing a job in Longmont, Colorado, and it was just, it was a total mess. And we were, there are walking platforms on the top of towers, sometimes big walking platforms. And what we were doing was we were taking off that entire platform, and they're probably like 8,000 pounds loaded. So you do it with a crane, but we were taking off this entire platform, which holds all of the equipment on it. So as soon as you do that, this site has no equipment on it, so obviously it's not online. So during the same day, you have to have the new platform all built out, and you better do that before that day comes, obviously, with all the new equipment. A lot of times you have to transfer some of the old equipment onto the new platform. Then you have to lift it up with the crane. You have to level it out, tighten it down. There's a ton of different connection points, and then you have to plug everything back in. And there are hundreds of cables up there, so it takes a very long time. And if anything goes wrong, you can be there for so long because, again, you have to stay at the site until it gets back online. And we had this day planned right ahead of another job that was overnight. So we were doing this platform swap, which is what you'd call it, during the day, and it took us all day. We were there until 10 p.m. I was there, 6 a.m. We were there until 10 p.m. And we had another job scheduled for the maintenance window, and the maintenance window is from midnight to 5 a.m. That is when you can do much bigger jobs and take off a lot more equipment off air at once because people are asleep. AT&T is more lenient then. But we had just stayed on this site for like 16 hours doing this platform swap, and again, this is so physically taxing. So I am just dead. And we have to go right to this other site to serve this maintenance window ticket because it starts at midnight, but you want to get there beforehand and prep and everything. And it's already 10 p.m. So basically we went straight to it. And more things went wrong with that site too. A lot of times with those overnight jobs, since they're usually bigger and involve more equipment going offline, it's a lot more work and you only have 5 hours to do it. Luckily, this overnight job was just on the ground, but it took a really long time. And in Colorado, there are black widows, and a lot of the equipment that they house stuff in, the outdoor equipment, they're like, big refrigerator looking units, and black widows can hide in there all the time. So my buddy and I were working and we saw a black widow, and we were like, okay, well, let's try to kill this thing. So we took a rock and threw it at this black widow, and it scurried into the cabinet that we were about to work on. Luckily, nobody got bit, but we were super sleep deprived at this point. Like I said, working 16 hours on the last site, straight to this site, and that delayed us, and some other things delayed us. So we were there probably until 8 a.m. So I had worked from 6 a.m. on this huge platform swap, 16 hours, and then went straight to another site and worked until 8 a.m. And this is the only time that I have ever truly hallucinated. On the drive home, because of sleep deprivation and just sheer exhaustion, I was literally hallucinating. The headlights in front of me, the brake lights, were like turning into bunnies, and I was dozing, and that's yet again another instance where, I almost got seriously hurt or killed, and it was on the road, not on the job site, but it was directly caused by the work. A lot of these deaths can be attributed to that exhaustion too. People can get tired. They can forget certain safety protocols on the tower, and sometimes people fall off, and you don't need to be more than 20 feet up to die from a fall. And some of these towers, like I said, the tallest ones are in Kansas, and I believe they're about 2,000 feet. So it's very serious. And we had one instance where somebody actually died on our site, and this was very jarring to all of us. We had a very exciting job for Smart Sky, which is a ground-based network for Wi-Fi for airplanes, but they serve private companies, so they serve like private jets, so it's not like GoGo Wireless or anything. And it's very expensive. It's like $20,000 a month for this, but they're selling them to people with private jets, so who really cares there? But this was a very new and exciting company at the time, and we got a job to do their very first site. And this was a very big deal to us and them. They trusted us with such an important task, and it was in Florida, kind of near Gainesville. So we flew all the way out there, and there were delays from when we got out there. They told us we're going to be ready on this day. So we were out there, and again, we lived in Colorado, so we're very far away from home. And they delayed us a week. But because they did that, they paid us. So we got paid to do absolutely nothing, or really whatever we wanted in Florida. So basically, me and my crew, we got a paid vacation in Florida for a week. And that was just a total blast. We went to Blue Springs. We went to Daytona Beach. We partied. It was so much fun. And what would happen next just, destroyed all of that. The day that they called us and said they were ready, we went out to the site. It was kind of rural outside of Gainesville. Pretty small tower. These guys, specifically for their network, they don't usually hang their equipment more than like 50 feet on the tower. So easy. But it's in the summer in Florida. So it's in the high 90s and super humid. And we rolled up to the site, and something very unusual for the industry happened, which was there was a separate contractor there. There was another company. And a lot of people have rules against this, like a lot of the people that dish out the work for AT&T or Verizon or whatever, where you can't have two contractors on the site at once. So we had never dealt with this. because these guys were allowing it and they needed the extra help. And because this is their very first site ever, they have all of these executives there. They flew in one of their engineers from like India. There were a ton of people there from Smart Sky, the company, plus this other contractor, plus 3 of us from our company. So there were a ton of people there. There was a lot of pressure, a lot of eyes on. People were there who have never climbed a tower before in their lives, so they are pushing and pushing and pushing for stuff to get done. And people are working super hard. Now, we met these guys at the other company. They were both older. They were super nice, down-to-earth guys. We loved them so much. They were a delight to work with. And we were all up on the tower at once. And again, it's extremely hot on this day. And one of the guys with the other company starts getting cramps. And this didn't click with any of us at the time, even though I was a fresh EMT from doing that at school, and one of my crewmates was a volunteer firefighter, and I believe he also had his EMT too. But cramps can be a sign of heat stroke. But this didn't click with any of us. And he decided that he was going to climb down because he was cramping. He was just dying in this heat. So he was going to climb down and get into his work truck and blast the AC and just cool off. So another guy replaced him and went up the tower and started working. And I'm on the ground at this point. At least one person from every company is always on the ground just to provide support. And there will be a rope running up the tower that the crew places there so you can, use a pulley to pull up equipment, pizza, whatever. We pulled basically everything with that. So I'm doing that on the ground, and we're just working away. And there was only 2 people with this other company. One of them is in the truck, and the other one is on the tower. And the guy on the tower yells down to me. He's like, "Hey, can you go check on my crewmate? I just want to make sure he's okay. It's been quite a while." And I'm like, "Yeah, sure, man." So I go and open the door, and I see it immediately clicks in my head that this guy is dead. Just the limpness of when I opened the door, and just my training kind of came back to me at that moment. And the very first thing that my brain told me to do, and this only took like a split second after seeing that limpness, was my arm shot up to his neck to try to get a carotid pulse. And at that time, it really only confirmed my fears because he was ice cold. And that was super difficult. So the Smart Sky guys who are not trained in first aid, they help get this guy out. They start CPR. My buddy, who's trained in medical just like I was, zips down the tower to help them out. And because we're so rural, it takes the ambulance like 45 minutes to get there. And, they're doing CPR, and ambulance gets there, and they put the AED on him. And if you know anything about AEDs, is when there is either a heartbeat or no shockable rhythm, which usually means asystole, as in there is no heartbeat, the AED will say no shock advised. Oh man, I didn't think this would be so hard. So they put the AED on him, and as soon as it said no shock advised, there's a ton of people here, but me and my buddy who are trained know at that point, that's when it was truly over. and the gravity of the situation starts to sink in. And both him and I I didn't work in the medical field, but I did rotations at Denver Health. So I have seen some crazy stuff. And so has he. He was in the field for a while. He's seen a lot more than me. But we've both seen some crazy stuff. And those people that you see, those patients, you don't know them at all. And it does take a certain kind of person to work in that field. But when you don't know them at all, it's a lot easier to deal with. But as soon as you introduce any type of emotion into it, and just meeting this guy that day and him being in the field with us in the most dangerous job in the world is enough. There's kind of like a brotherhood between all tower climbers. It was enough to add that emotional aspect to it. And it just made it so painful. And then the time came where we had to call his daughter, and we had to tell him. That his dad wasn't coming home. And that's tough. That's a super tough thing to do. And we got to experience it that day. So that was definitely the low emotional point of the career. We got on a flight the next day. We kind of have, there's some unspoken rules of tower climbing, but if someone dies on a site, generally that crew will not go back to that site. And we did exactly that. The work still had to be finished. There were other crews that they had in the area. So they called other crews on and we got out of there immediately. And we had to take about a week off after that. Because it was super heavy, especially when I got home out of the airport and started driving home. That's personally when it was the heaviest for me. Kind of everything was over at that point. I was back home, so everything came together at that point. So if anybody's watching this who happens to be in this industry and you have lost somebody, I feel for you. I know what that's like, and if you haven't, I hope it never happens to you, because I would not wish that pain on anyone. It's a very special kind of pain. After that, I took more of an office-related role in the company, and it was pretty funny because that whole time I was pushing to get in the office and get a promotion, and I finally did, and I absolutely hated the office. I mean, the lights are bright, there's, all sorts of people there making small talk, there's the HR person there, they're always terrible. It just was not fun for me to make that transition, so I kind of did that for a very short time, and then we kind of found a different place for me, and I worked on my own. I worked in integration, which means when people go install equipment on a site, brand new equipment, you go with your computer and you plug into that equipment with your laptop, and you tell that equipment kind of who it is, what it is, where it is, and what to do. And that was really fun. I got to go to all sorts of sites in Denver. I got to go to the data center that they have in Denver, which is basically this concrete block building that could withstand a bomb and stuff. that was very fun. And I didn't climb much after that. I really didn't. I only climbed a couple of times, and towards the end of that year, I decided I wanted to do something different. And a very large company was trying to get into being a cellular provider. So I decided to apply with them to quite a high position. I believe one of their recruiters actually called me, and that's how I found out about the position, and I got that job. And that was really cool for a little while. And that was poorly managed in the way that they were an existing satellite TV provider. So that is completely different than building a cellular network. And they refused to hire any external people to a director position or above. So they had a bunch of satellite TV guys in charge of a bunch of tower climbers, and they had no idea what they were doing. It was such a mess and very disorganized, and the department was hemorrhaging money, and I have no idea what happened to that department. I wouldn't be surprised if they cut it to this day. I don't know if they're still going. I haven't heard. I mean, I bring up that these guys were trying to become a cellular provider, and I do believe that they do provide cellular service. But I would challenge you to guess who that is. You probably don't even know who it is because they have such poor marketing. I mean, they were trying to become contenders with AT&T and Verizon, and most people don't even know who they are. That only lasted about a year, not too long, because that following year was 2020, and we all know what happened in 2020, so I lost my job along with many, many other people, and that was the end of that career. That's where it really all came to an end. 2020 was 2020, and I also unfortunately mismanaged my stress and mental health issues arising from working so hard, and was trying medications with my doctor, and I had a very serious reaction to one of them, and I sustained a brain injury. So on top of everything else that was happening in the world, I became disabled for a couple of years due to that, with severe motor issues and cognitive issues and all sorts of stuff. So I had to move back home to be with family so that they could help me out, and I'm very grateful for that. And that was really the end of that career. It's one of those things, like people who are in the military will say, looking back on it, that they had a lot of fun, but they would never do it again. And I am the same way. I had a ton of fun. I built so many friendships, so many relationships with all sorts of people from all over, and got some of the best views imaginable. And it was really great, but at the same time, it was also really terrible. Physically so taxing. You don't get paid enough. I don't know what's enough to do that job. It is a tough job. And if you're in that industry, my heart totally goes out to you. I wish you the absolute best on your journey, and hope you can find some happiness within that industry or in another industry. And with that, that is the end of story time. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to support the channel, don't forget to like the video and consider subscribing. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.